Solange Moujan joins me on the set to take a look at today's press review. Hi, Solange.
Hi,
lots of focus still on that crisis between Russia and Ukraine after Moscow said talks should continue.
Yeah, after meeting with his foreign minister and his defense minister on the issue of war, Vladimir Putin, or peace. Vladimir Putin is, quote, equidistant between the two, according to Kommersant. The Russian paper says that Putin has decided for now to go for neither peace nor war, but they say they have pulled out some troops. Now, for Politico's European site, the socially distanced meeting was, quote, a de-escalation dance that was so choreographed it might have been better to hold it on the stage of the Bolshoi. And for the Independence cartoonist Brian Adcock, a beep, beep, beep can be heard from the life support machine that's currently keeping a dove of peace alive. Meanwhile, Nurse Putin is debating whether to kill or revive these hopes of peace. Will he or won't he strike? A limbo that is the theme of Morton Moreland's cartoon, where Russia is a hockey player wielding its stick towards Ukraine, represented by a figure skater.
Now, of course, figure skating has been a lot in the news as well, particularly in regard to the Olympics in Beijing.
Yeah, it was the day that the Olympics died. That's what the Daily Telegraph says of the decision to allow Russian skater Kamila Valieva to compete until her positive drug test is investigated. Now, for the paper, the controversial decision has left the integrity of the Beijing Olympics in tatters, according to the paper. But for The Guardian, the real issue here isn't doping, but the 15-year-old athlete being a, quote, pawn of her coaches, the federation, government, and the Olympics. It argues that doping is just a symptom of a greater disease, quote, the abuse of minors. It asks whether 13, 14, and 15-year-olds should be competing at all. That if she ends up, quote, tarred and condemned, she'll be taking the fall, they say, for the bigger kingpin will escape censure.
Now, that dark side of sports with its cutthroat competitiveness can actually also be applied to politics.
Yeah, that's the view of L'Opinion today. It says that like in football, there is a transfer window that is open right now in French politics, where politicians pick and switch teams. And after Valérie Pécresse's first major rally, many are expected to jump ship and switch alliances. France 24's website has an article about how many politicians see her Sunday performance as, quote, a Titanic flop. And it's left conservatives wondering if they have picked the wrong horse again. For Libération's illustrator Coco, Pécresse and the right sonne faux, or sound fake, and they have a note of the far right, or Eric Zemmour. You can see him there on the notes. There is a far right note to it all, referring here to Pécresse's use of far right language and ideas in her rally and in her campaign. And Pécresse is not the only one who is losing supporters. As Libération tells us, the left's Christiane Taubira has lost the support of the head of France's radical left, making her path to official candidacy, or 500 mayoral signatures, all the more difficult.
All right, let's go now to Pakistan, where an honor killing is making the headlines.
Yeah, back in 2016, a social media star who was known as the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan because of her provocative photos, well, she was strangled and killed by her brother, who said with no remorse, quote, "Of course I killed her because of her intolerable behavior," end quote. Now, well, as the Pakistani paper Dawn tells us, a high court has let him out of prison after less than 6 years. The release comes as their mother said she forgave him. And it also sends a message, as this is one of Pakistan's most high-profile honor killings, or the act of murdering a family member. It's nearly always women who've brought shame to the family. And in an editorial, Dawn condemns such a vision of honor and of the sacred, referring to the death by bludgeoning of a mentally ill man this past weekend who was accused of desecrating holy verses. The paper asks, what have we become? Is there really no end to our days of shame? And it blames, quote, successive governments who have capitulated to the rising forces of religious extremism, end quote. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has accorded an interview in Le Figaro where he says that on this 6-month anniversary of the Taliban taking over, it is time for Western powers to acknowledge the Taliban, that they shouldn't wait for it to, quote, respect women's rights as the West sees them, end quote, for it to lift sanctions.
All right, Solange, just to wrap up now, you found an interesting article about elephants.
Yeah, and it's one that could bring us much, much closer to stomping out the killing of some 50,000 elephants every year for their tusks. National Geographic tells us that scientists have been using a technique called familial tracing to find out where the tusks originated. It is a method that is often used to track human crimes, namely of serial killers, but for now, for the first time, it's being used for environmental animal crimes. The research took DNA from the tusks, from the confiscated ivory. They matched that with the droppings of herds, and they were thus able to map the movements of poaching groups. So dismantling them may hopefully no longer be such a huge tusk.
Solange, thank you for that. Solange Mijan there with today's press review. Well, 6 months